Jeff Hindle. I have the pleasure of moderating a panel here with two fantastic leaders in the PayTech industry, not only in Canada, but probably worldwide. They can argue with each other as to which one is the most important and best one, and I will remain silent on the issue because I do like them both. I'm Jeff Hindle. I'm from MasterCard, from Global Strategy. I'm the least relevant person up here at the moment. So I'm going to ask if the panel can introduce themselves. So Sue, why don't you share with us your greatness?
Oh my gosh. So just so everybody knows, Jeff is totally getting me back. So this is actually going to be quite humorous.
Getting back. This is going to be a full contact presentation.
Yeah. So Jeff stepped in late. We had some changes before the week as to how this was all going to go. So anyway, have some pity on me. I'm just kidding. So I am I'm Sue. I'm the founder of Fintech Growth Syndicate, which we have shortened quite a bit to FGS. And started the company just over 3 years ago to work with large incumbents and help accelerate innovation. And one of our sort of levers that we use is partnering. So working with companies that have already created solutions and trying to help our clients understand what's coming at them from a industry change perspective and disruption. And my career that led up to me actually having some knowledge about how to do that is I worked with some of the I would say more incumbent financial technology companies in Canada, whether it was SimCorp, Broadridge, and my last role before I decided to ditch the corporate life and be an entrepreneur I was head of innovation for Finastra. So a little bit of experience with how to sort of get innovation to work or not. And yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Laurence, why don't you share?
Yeah, so I'm also from the innovation space, but I'm actually not from a payments background. I spent most of my career in telecom, and I speak the Queen's English, but I'm obviously from South Africa. Here in Canada, I worked at Bell. I ran Bell Mobility, and I think we did some pretty innovative things there. I've done 5 startups. 3 of them went to as far as VC funding. Exited both the first 2, and this is the 3rd. So have always kind of been in the innovation space. Started Nano Pay in 2013, and the whole idea behind Nano Pay is to digitize fiat money for central banks. So we built a platform that today can do around 50,000 transactions per second. I think we'll go over 100,000 transactions per second by the end of this year, which would probably be more than every card entity put together globally. And we can do that on one AWS machine that costs us $5,000 a month. Performance that is unparalleled. If you compare that with faster payments in the UK, for example, faster payments, about £1 billion of IBM hardware, gives them 2,500 transactions per second. So I think on a dollar per transaction per second, that makes us about 100,000 times cheaper. So I think we can exploit that. The second thing I wanted to mention is we recently formed the PayTechs of Canada, and we haven't got an executive director to run that entity yet, although we're in the search business. So if you've got the right CV and you're up for a challenge and you really want to stimulate this market, please come to us and get involved. We are looking for an executive director. I'm the chairman of that, the chairman of the board, and one of the founding members. And the whole idea is we really need to accelerate innovation in Canada, and we lack a platform for innovation to do that. So, the starting point is that with the report that we've recently released, we get to show what the facts are. Who's in PayTech, what the issues are, and starting from that, we're going to then work together to find out from the industry what everyone's needs are. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to compete with each other. Of course, a lot of PayTechs are going to compete with each other, but we can also collaborate where it makes sense. And in an earlier panel today, I heard about how all of the banks are collaborating, and I think that's fantastic. It's just the banks are not collaborating with anyone else, which doesn't really work at an ecosystem level. So we need to broaden the collaboration so that it is broad. And to that end, there's no reason why we would exclude anyone from PayTechs of Canada. It is inclusive, and indeed we already have at least one bank that has signed up. In fact, we have a bank that's a founding member, and other banks that are discussing joining. So don't get me wrong, this is not all about us versus them. This is about an inclusive thing to try and deliver the best possible experience for payments in Canada. And that's for consumers and for businesses. So, I would argue that we're miles behind, and we need something short and hard and quick and aggressive to actually catch up. I think we're about 5 years behind most people in Asia, and we should never compare ourselves with the United States because they're even further behind.
So I'll jump in and I'll say this. What's really great about PayTechs of Canada is, PayTechs of Canada, excuse me, I just flew 20 hours. What's really great about this, though, is that it's an opportunity not just to commune with the banks, but also commune with entrepreneurs like Laurence who've actually done this and not just talked about it in theory, not just made pretty PowerPoints, but actually have operating, functioning systems that are at approaching scale in usage around the world. And so this is where innovation in fintech is. It's not just at the seed stage in Canada. It's actually starting to make an impact. And so these types of organizations are going to help us and expose people to true entrepreneurs that are executing like Sue and Laurence. So shall we jump into it?
Great.
Yet another report from FGS.
Yeah.
So Sue, why don't you tell us why this one now?
We did some work late last year to look at the entire fintech ecosystem across Canada, and it was really interesting once you sort of were able to sort of like understand who all the players are, how many there are, and just the sheer size and scale of both the contribution and the impact that they're making in the marketplace. And so, the opportunity to do this with respect to just PayTech was about creating awareness. So, I mean, the logo chart is obviously an eye chart. It's not meant for you to be able to read it, but if you download the report, you should be able to dig into each one of those, layers or sections of the pie. To start to get familiar with some of the things that are some of the products and choices that are in the market, and I think we believe that innovation will happen faster with partnerships, with collaboration. We also are concerned that as we kind of sit in the middle of the ecosystem in Canada and see everything that's happening in the report, we'll talk about this a little bit, but everything that's happening in Canada with respect to other players that we're not talking very much about, like the big tech giants, like some of the newer challenger banks, that they're going to leapfrog, frankly, the incumbents to market with products that are going to be very hard to catch up with. And so we wanted to do this report to support, the goals and the mission of PayTechs of Canada, but also this is something that, we will continue to do to make sure that there's a place that you can kind of see what's what in Canada with respect to innovation.
And just before we move off, this report is available for download now.
It
correct?
is. This report was public. We did do one report last year for the open banking team at Finance Canada that we didn't make public. There was a synopsis made public, but this one is. And this chart, just so you know, once you kind of take a look at the report, this basically takes the functions within payments, and Payments Canada has a great section on their website that digs into sort of how this how the transactions flow and what the different layers within those functions are. And so this provides you a look at, the transaction function, which is as money flows between payors and payees, or from payors to payees, et cetera, as well as and so that would be the transaction layer. The enabling layer, or the enabling function is, I'm just going to be 2 more seconds.
No. Sorry, what you mentioned before about me not having actually seen the presentation before I got here requires that I have to flip it forward so I see the slide. Sorry, carry on.
I told you this was going to be, he was going to be doing this to me all, anyway. But so the middle section is the enabling section. Often, most often is data, digital governance, things like that are really necessary for being able to process a payment. And then the supporting layer are all of those that are not necessary for processing a transaction, but or for the transaction to be successful, but are there to also, things like budgeting tools or other things that are critical to the whole payments ecosystem. And so the punchline is there's over 600 of those companies, which, to some people in my space, it's not that surprising. But I think that would be pretty surprising to incumbents to know that there's that many companies out there.
And I will say this, folks, as a person who reads a tremendous amount of research, it's actually pretty remarkable. One thing I really like about the FGS reports is they are written as a fact-based piece of work. This is not something that's got spin. It's not something that's got bias. It's based on real research that's done out with the group. And I would really, really encourage you to download not only this one, but the synopsis of the Fintech report to get a very interesting view of what's going on. There's some potentially challenging statements that are made in there that might go against the marketing narrative that you hear generally in the community. But there's also some really great news. So let's jump into it. We've got a number of PayTechs that have started over a number of years. Laurence, overall, how do you think that we're doing?
Yeah, I think it's alarming to see how it suddenly dropped off. I think that's the first observation that most people notice in terms of the number of companies that are started. And I think there's a general frustration in the industry that we haven't been able to provide the real-time rail, which is kind of the core that you need to build everything on top of, and that we haven't moved forward on access in any way. I was speaking to Doug earlier, and he said it's Groundhog Day. We're in the exact same spot we were 3 years ago when he was last directly involved. We literally have not moved forward one iota. And during that time, we have had thousands of meetings, and we spent a huge amount of money, and we've done 1 million reports, and we've driven consensus throughout the industry, but we haven't moved forward. So I think that might be part of it. I also think there was a bit of a boom with some of the ICOs where you could get easy funding. But I think there's more and more funding available in Canada than there was before. When we were financed, we had to go to the US to get our finance. So it's counterintuitive that it's dropped off that much, because I would have assumed that there were way more startups. I think the only other observation that I found, and I'd be interested in what Sue thinks as well, is that there are very few failures here. And I think that says something about Canada. And if we're not prepared to get out there and swing for the fences, and we land up with a whole bunch of mediocre companies that never really get to scale, never really get bought, never really fail, that's not a great place to be. I'd rather there are fewer companies on this chart and more failures, and they were swinging for the fences and making a difference. The numbers are quite amazing. It was 2.8 billion invested, raised.
Yep.
So that's not an insignificant amount of money. And the number of employees, 80,000 employees in the sector, that's pretty amazing. But rather than have a lot of mediocrity, we've heard so many times that platform players win. Who are going to be the 1 or 2 platform players? Because there's kind of only room for 1 or 2,
Yeah. Yeah, and if I could add to that, I think the other thing about this information is just the sheer economic impact, both of the companies themselves, but also the ability for those companies to actually deliver back, significant new revenues and savings in payments in Canada. The fees and the cost to change, the legacy technology are very high, and the cost to transact in Canada is very high. A lot of these companies represent better solutions, faster solutions, newer technology, newer business models. And my big concern looking at this is, the number of early stage companies that, if you look at the way the chart reads, just in case you don't know, is the line is the number of companies founded in those years. The color is where they're at now. So even if you were founded in 2008, there's still, over 10 years later, companies that haven't made it into, past the early stage. That means that they're still struggling to get customers. And those that do expand and do move on to, kind of be incumbents in their space or be later stage and be acquired, which are unfortunately also too few in Canada, are what's going to happen to them, right? And it's not to say everybody should succeed, but this is the growth of, small business growth in Canada is huge, and they're part of it. So that's another way to look at it.
I also think this is where innovation happens, right? Innovation's not happening in large banks and large telcos very often, right? Innovation's happening here. And, it's up to us to build an ecosystem where large banks and large telcos and other large entities can benefit from this innovation, find a collaboration and a way forward. But for that to happen, these guys have to succeed or fail. And I think we need to do it quicker.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to add to that, and certainly when we look around the world, we look into open banking, the more mature open banking environments that exist with PSPs. They are starting, at the end of the day, every single transaction results in an actual payment. I mean, that's how the transaction's done, whether that payment's invisible, whether that payment is overt, a movement of funds happen. And the reality is, as new value propositions are brought online by great entrepreneurs working in other industries, the fact of the matter is they need to consummate those transactions with a payment. And when we look around the world in areas that have like PSP regulations that allow payment service providers to build unique value-added products for a very small link that is not serviceable by incumbent financial institutions, we're seeing new value-added opportunities come into the market. And those are growing to the point now where we're starting to see major partnerships worldwide. There was recently announced a partnership between Klarna, Aiden, and Alibaba, which I think is going to bring innovation in this space to our shores if we don't take it to theirs. And so, as it compares to other markets specifically, yes, we've got a relatively small number of entrepreneurs, but I think the creativity is strong. I think you might say NanoPay is a leader in this thought. You might be a little biased.
Yeah, look, I'm not here to talk about NanoPay, but I think at an industry level, the interesting thing is if you compared us with, say, the UK, and maybe actually the financial crisis created that opportunity in the UK. Maybe the problem was we actually did too well in the financial crisis. But and then we thought, okay, we've obviously got it right, therefore we shouldn't change anything. But in the UK, there's just been this extraordinary boom. I mean, PayPal is now going, not PayPal, Facebook is going to build a payments capability. Guess where they're going to do it? In the UK. So knowing that Brexit is just about to happen, and it's probably the last place in the world that most entities would want to invest, Facebook is going to put all of their people into the UK to do their innovation in payments. We should have been that place. We should have been that place. And the reason we're not is because we've been slow on doing a whole bunch of these things. The number of challenger banks in the UK, extraordinary. Do you know that when the Brexit vote happened, there were 100 applications for banking licenses in Lithuania the next week? And those are all places, those are all entities that were already licensed. The non-banks that, or small challenger banks that were based in other parts of Europe that were licensed in the UK thought they might lose their licenses. So this is EMI and banking licenses. 100 applications within a week in Lithuania. I mean, that's real scale. You know, I don't know how many total banking applications have even happened in the last 10 years here in Canada, but it's not like it's easy. It's a sort of 6-month process in Europe, and it's a 3 to 4 year process here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm bouncing around.
He
while
is,
he's
because he doesn't know what
talking
the slides say. The previous one, though, if I can just touch on
with me.
it.
The previous one. This one?
The one with that one.
That one.
This
There you
one.
go. So this is just a graphic. It is a bit cheeky because each one of those buildings is a major Canadian bank. So you can see their logos at the top. And those are challenger banks, you know, sort of stacked up to represent the 4 different kinds of challenger banks. And it's a definition that we adopted from what Europe is using and other places. So it's really saying that there are 4 types of challenger banks. So there's the new ones, and those are the ones that actually get an actual bank license, which, you know, there are few of those. Few in terms of new banks. So you see some great names on there. There's non-banks who are also have the ability to function as a bank. The interesting ones, too, are the beta banks, which are the ones that are being incubated within the within an existing financial institution. A lot of credit unions are now, you know, launching full digital credit unions. In fact, there's certainly more credit unions doing that than there are smaller Canadian financial institutions. And then the non. Which one? Whatever
Neo.
one I didn't mention. Neo, thank you. And Neo in Canada, we've had Mogo for quite a while. In fact, you know, other than Virgin in Canada, we think that, you know, Virgin and Mogo were kind of 2 of the first newer challenger banks in Canada. But now we've got Stack, we've got Coho. Coho just raised what?
42.
42.
million?
42? Yeah.
43?
Okay,
44? 42, okay.
Do I hear 45, 45, 50, 50? Anybody want to see 50? If you raise your paddle, you are investing. Go on. No.
And I know I've not mentioned somebody. Who did I miss? Like North One, they launched there for B2B. They're not B2C, and they're launching in the U.S. market because the Canadian market is just, you know, going to take them way too long. Relay FI, they're not actually launched yet. Anyway, I feel like I've missed one, but there's Revolut keeps saying that they, you know, are coming. So there's lots of stuff happening, and we're talking a lot about startups. So, you know, these are a form of startups, but and they're leveraging payments as a way to encourage people to, you know, store money, just like Starbucks did, just like, you know, a lot of the big players have been doing for a while. And to anyone, you know, I don't necessarily think it matters to me if I put my money in Stack and I use my Stack card or my Stack app to transact, right? It's not that different than my bank account, except for that's the only thing I can do with it. So,
What I find interesting about your list of neobanks, what is the definition of a neobank for you versus the others?
A neobank
Well, I put
is-
you on the spot and ask technical questions.
That's all right. A neobank is someone that is entering the market without a bank license, right? Without but is virtually a bank, right? They're, in terms of their, you can deposit money, you can store money, and people can transact, which is, you know, the original purpose of a
And
bank.
technically, they can't call themselves a bank.
Right, right.
Okay, so neobanks. But what's very interesting about the list in Canada, which was something that I have to say I wasn't ready for, is I really felt that the Canadian secondary banks or the new banks would really be quite dominated by the existing incumbents. These ones seem to have quite a separate relationship. Doesn't that bode well for us?
Well, it does, except, you know, the ones that are well-funded and have started to, you know, acquire customers. I think I read something, was it Coho has 150,000 customers. Stack, I think, is around 30 to 50,000. EQ Bank is, I think, in the neighborhood of 75,000. So I think it's great, but it's an awful lot of, it takes an awful lot of money for them to, for people to become aware of them. I mean, and I won't make a joke, but if you weren't aware of them.
No, you can make a joke.
Well, you were Mr. Fintech at Mars before, so I mean, so I think there is a general.
It's not that I wasn't aware of them. That's not what I said.
Did he say that? He did say that.
I think he said that.
I think he said. See, nobody actually wants to out you. Anyway, I just think.
It can be on if you want.
I don't think consumers and businesses are going to find these companies. They're just not. So, when we talk about, I have a strong opinion around consumer adoption in Canada, that it's not because Canadians are risk averse and because, like Debbie Gamble did an amazing presentation yesterday on trust, and I 100% agree with that. But, some of these have launched on a highly trusted, long-term, long-standing prepaid card, sort of system that has
A great brand, I hear.
Has no issues.
That does an excellent job.
So I just think that I think consumers, if they had access to them, I think we would start to see more similar adoption rates to the global average. We wouldn't maybe see like India, China, 60-70% of consumers using fintechs, but we would see way more than we are today. But how do you find them?
But in the Canadian market, let's face it, we've got oligopolistic control by the Canadian banks. It's somewhat unique relative in the world. There's other markets that have that, but the degree of power that they have in Canada is significant. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we are now getting challenger organizations, I think even to this level, that are becoming material, and maybe material enough to move beyond the four walls that is Canada, mm-hmm. is also impressive, because we're certainly seeing Wealthsimple in lots of markets. And now Wealthsimple is, a relatively unique case in some ways, but I think it bodes well. And
we put Wealthsimple on here. I mean, Wealthsimple, obviously everyone knows.
Not really a bank.
Well, no, but we put them on here because they offer a savings account. So, they started as a robo-advisor, direct to consumer. Then they moved to, B2B. I don't think I've seen any formal announcements of any white labeling of their platform, but now they've got, stock trading. They've got a partnership with H&R Block. I might be making some of these things up, but this is a full-fledged. Start thinking about who else could they partner with, right? Their savings account is EQ Bank.
Yeah, they'll become a platform.
They're gonna, yeah.
So, but if you just go back, Jeff, to the previous thing, I think mm-hmm. one of the problems with neobanks in Canada is the unit economics. So they're trying to create a new brand, which is expensive and difficult, and then they've got a unit economic problem because there's all this friction when it actually comes to doing the actual payments, which is core to what they're trying to achieve.
Right.
And that friction is because most of them are partnering with a tier 2 bank that is not a direct settler. So it's kind of they're going through someone who's then doing the clearing and settlement. And the more mouths to feed, the more expensive it is, which is bad for the unit economics. And it's also slower. And the chances of something going wrong are much, much higher because you do the transaction effectively 3 times. You do it in the neobank, and then you do it again in the bank that's actually supporting you and providing the cash management capability, mm-hmm. and then you do it again in the direct settler. So, so much can go wrong. And then the last thing that I'd say is a lot of these businesses, and Wealthsimple and Coho are both in the same space in that way, are focused on the actual data. So they help you do things that traditional banks don't do so well in understanding your spend and that sort of thing. But to do that effectively, you need much more data capability going backwards and forwards over the rail itself, which just stops dead now because there is no ISO in Canada. So even if we had access to the rails now, you wouldn't have the data that you need. And we've all decided that it's going to be ISO. So one of the things that we've got to do here is we've got to push this forward and quickly. And until everyone we're connecting directly to provides that data layer, these guys are always going to be working with one arm behind their backs.
Mm-hmm.
So
I build
bad
one?
unit economics, and they
Yeah.
can't really deliver the frictionless, and I can say that because we actually own the trademark to frictionless, by the way.
It's true.
Yeah, experience that they're all trying to create.
And the flip side of that, just for 2 seconds, is
You can talk as long as you would
I
like.
can. So the flip side of that is some of them have a new approach to their business model, right? And Victor Dodig said on the day one that how can they charge no fees? How can they make money when they charge no fees? Does anybody know how they make money when they don't charge fees? Ben? Interchange. They also make money on
Cross-sell.
and they make money on the deposit. No, that's the answer. The thing is,
Ben, you should know.
the thing is that there are different ways to make money, and we're seeing really interesting companies.
By the way, all of those things is how Victor makes money and
True,
more as
but-
well.
But
and fees.
And fees.
right. I think there's something about
I mean, I'm pretty sure he's paid a couple pennies more than I am, but I think he should know that.
right, and I think that the financial institutions have also enjoyed a significant amount of profit, which I work for some really big companies who also did that, had shareholders they had to answer to. But what's happening is companies that are coming to market with really great new offerings and offering consumers and businesses the ability to pay less in Canada can't really get to market to offer those business models because they have to use the existing way the industry works. Like I think that's kind of one of the fundamental challenges.
But if we look at the platform companies out there, Facebook, Google, how much do they charge their clients? Nothing. It's all about the data, right? So if we want to move to an environment where it's all about the data and we want to drop the fees and give people a better experience at a lower price, we have to have the data.
Yeah.
Right?
You did mention, Laurence, a couple of the barriers that exist. So the mouths to feed in terms of the process and the speed of the transactions. One of the other things that I'd like to say about the payments chain in Canada, because there isn't direct access, is that the fintechs who are coming in the tier 2, tier 3 players can only be as innovative as the weakest link in the chain that gets them to the payment system.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's a little bit unique in the approach in Canada is there are intermediaries being layered on intermediaries as opposed to people really talking about direct access to the payment system, which would allow an innovator to wrap data or to wrap services directly around the payments packaging that's happening. And I feel like that's a bit of an impediment to the innovation itself.
Yeah. I mean, if you're recommending, if you're working on new ideas within an existing traditional organization, you have, and you want to make less money or potentially replace what is currently a really viable, product, like take Jose from Cadillac Fairview. That's a company that has been a landlord for years and years and years and years and charges rent and builds buildings. So they could continue to do that until that model no longer works. And then they could be Blockbuster. And instead they're trying to say, hey, the world's changing around us. And, we need to look at that and say, what are some of the things we're going to do to bridge and potentially future-proof the company from those types of changes? And I think that's the same. So yeah, it's really hard if you don't have the support from your organization to do that kind of thing. It's going to be very difficult for you to move anything forward.
I think, Jeff, one of the things to your point there is that the banks are providing the infrastructure to make a lot of this happen. And the banks are like, oh, we're so busy because you're working on links, and that's taking up all of our people. The reality is keeping the lights on from a technology perspective is using up about 80% of the IT budget. And a small portion of it is actually going to the innovation side of things. And in The Economist last week, they had some global numbers, and the global numbers were that if you reduced by a third the total spend of all the banks that are listed in the world, that would be $80 per year for every man, woman, and child on this planet. That's an astounding number. considering how many people live on less than that in the world, and there are lots of people, believe you me, in the third world that live on less than that, $80 per person per year, man, woman, child, just by reducing it. So one of the things we have to deal with is legacy infrastructure that I believe our banks have underinvested in. So their payout ratios have gone up over the last few years. They're all between 40 and 50% now. That's because why does your payout ratio go up? Two reasons. One, you're trying to line the pockets of executives, right, so that their share price goes up, right? The other reason is they've run out of ideas. So if they've run out of ideas, let some other people with some good ideas in. And take back some of that money, reinvest in your infrastructure, make this country work properly. Invest in the long run to make us better. There are two things that we need as a country to compete globally. The one thing is a telecom infrastructure, and the other is a payments infrastructure. The world is flat. There are 1 billion people in India, and there are 1 billion people in China that are as smart and as hungry and as capable as anyone here. And they have better payment systems and better internet. They're going to win because they can deliver anything we can deliver from over there at a fraction of the price.
Mm-hmm. So this is a great segue. By the way, I know the world is flat because I saw it on YouTube. So if the small people don't strike fear into our bank CEOs, we know that the big players do. We know that Mr. Mackay, David over at RBC, is on record saying many times that the people he fear are the global digital giants. What did you learn about them in your PayTech study?
Well, and I'm so fortunate to have, Jeet, who's sitting in the front row, is part of our team. She's our
Jeet, do the waving.
Payments expert. And Jeet worked both in the Fintech space as well as for a bank in India on the innovation team. And so she brings a ton of knowledge to us and also to the reports that we do. And so what we have learned with deep expertise, but also just research is, all of these guys are here. We know that they have their core offering in Canada for their core business, but they're also, very quickly moving into financial services. So I don't get paid to say this, but Trevor, for instance, who's here from Payment Source. You can give them a wave. So Trevor's got his company, Payment Source, has a number of different products, but he's partnered with Paytm, Amazon, Alipay, PayPal. And so, those companies now, you can load cash into those accounts through Trevor's products, which puts them in a pretty interesting position in Canada, right? And Payment Source has a partnership with Canada Post so that you can do that at 6,000 places across Canada, 6,000 post offices. So there are places where they're entering, and there are places where they're making it very obvious that they're entering the space. But Alipay, for instance, what's behind Alipay is also this massive e-commerce organization that is working with our Canadian companies that are trying to sell products to get them to sell those products on Tmall. So what that means is that those Canadian products now get in front of, I don't even know how many people are in China. Anyway, everyone in China who uses, I guess maybe the analogy is about 1 billion people on Tmall, Alipay, something like that, to sell their products into those markets. Well, the same happens in reverse, right? And so this e-commerce world is changing drastically, and it all has to do, it kind of all comes back to payments. And so I think the bank CEOs are right to be worried. Just right off the bat, PayPal has 6 million customers in Canada. So if they offered if they did what Wealthsimple is doing and started to branch, out, mind you, I'm not sure that they would use Canada to do that, but, branch out and start to, add other fintech offerings, they would certainly have a huge head start over, Stack and Coho. So that's some of the stuff we learned.
So big fan of Payment Source, know them. From a nano pay perspective, what are your thoughts about the global giants?
Yeah, I don't want to talk about nanoPay, but I think the global giants present a huge opportunity for PayTech companies in Canada. So I would encourage people to partner with them because they do things. I also think it's the best defense is to actually partner with these guys rather than just sit around and wait for them to eat our lunch. Because if we carry on, not providing the necessary infrastructure for innovation, that's what's going to happen. It'd be so easy for guys like Alipay just to do every single payment in Canada, and basically all Canadian ecosystems would just be cut out completely. There are already billions of dollars spent every year on those platforms in Canada, where they're literally flying aircraft of people over on shopping trips, and none of that money is seen directly through any of our ecosystem. They're connecting directly into Cadillac Fairview and that sort of thing, and they can actually spend their funds from China right here. Doesn't touch our ecosystem, So I mean that's a disaster. It's not much. There's not much more for them to do to then say, okay, this is now available to Canadians, and it works better and it's easier.
Yeah.
And I think both in Paytm and in Alipay and WeChat Pay, they've got so much funding going around inside the ecosystem that very, very little of it actually gets to banks. And when it doesn't get to banks, you'll end up with a problem, and that problem is that banks have this magic capability to make money out of thin air. You put $100 in a bank and it turns into 1,000. But these ecosystems don't do that. So then we land up with a liquidity problem when all of our money is actually sitting in an ecosystem that's held outside of our country. That's terrifying.
That's actually very true.
Apple and Google have so much capability, it's extraordinary. I mean, half the phones here in Canada are on Apple. Apple's already got into the space with, we funded by Goldman Sachs, so we have quite a lot of insight into the space. And Goldman Sachs and Apple have already, got into the space together. It's not a huge step for them to do it in Canada as well, right? These guys are
and
big.
MasterCard,
Yeah,
sorry.
sorry. And MasterCard.
But Square is another great example. So Square has applied for a bank license for the second time around in the U.S. So the first time they were turned down, and if what you read is true, they're almost assured to get it through the second round. And you think of how many businesses are using Square as a fundamental, aspect of their business. And it's nothing negative towards banks, but as a small business, it's very hard to, get the attention of a bank to give you the proper services. So someone like Square adds banking. I think the small business market is very quickly going to be, impossible for banks to compete, right? So I think, some of them are obvious and some of them are, going to fly under the radar.
Well, and a couple of the comments, if I may, just to reinforce what Laurence said, that is flying a bit under the radar in the discussions happening in Canada, and that is the off-us transactions, the transactions that are being executed by global networks that are happening in the cloud that don't land in Canada. It creates tax problems, it creates regulatory risk problems. And it creates problems for Canadian retailers and Canadian businesses and a number of other places. And the other thing that Laurence touched on that also doesn't get enough press in this country is the economic power that's behind them. And one of the things that is very interesting to know is that Ant Financial is actually one of the world's largest bond fund managers. They make Goldman Sachs and BlackRock and some of these other companies actually quite nervous just by the sheer amount of money they have sitting in their overnight funds. So we are talking about organizations that have the ability to not only enact how money is moved, the types of businesses and innovation that will happen, but also have the economic power to turn on and turn off funding around the world.
The other thing I was going to say is, on WhatsApp, this is the dominant platform throughout the developing world. Sub-Saharan Africa, everywhere in South America, just about everywhere in Asia. That's what everyone uses for all of their communication. if you're in Brazil, you sell everything through WhatsApp. In India, it's used as the primary communication. It's used much more than, say, something like even Facebook or Instagram or something like that. It's all WhatsApp. So they really do most of the sale of goods in WhatsApp, and the only bit that is not there is the payment. They add payment. They've recreated exactly what Alipay's done, where they own the whole ecosystem.
But this is, this goes to the sheer fact that while payments are extremely important, they are, as I always say, incidental to the transaction. Nobody leaves their home to go shopping to buy, a new pair of shoes, and the goal is actually to make a payment. The goal is to buy a new pair of shoes. Mm-hmm. How can we eliminate any friction on the payment?
Yeah.
And this is where it's going on. So Canada's reaction.
One tiny little point, though, because I actually wanted to. So Rotman and Payments Canada have stood up a business of payments course, and it was on 2 weeks ago. I think they're going to do another one in November. Okay. And in that course, you learn a lot about this kind of stuff. And so one of the things I would encourage anyone to do if you're in the position of, if you have teams and, it's great to hear little bits when you go to an event, but to actually learn and understand this space, that's one option. What I learned, which I thought was, we need to research this, is WeChat Pay and Alipay, and I'm looking at Jeffrey because he's from Payments Canada, and I think he might know. You guess how many employees they have?
So we have
south of 2,000.
2,000. That was it. We've got to get more bidding from the audience.
So let's just think about that. Old unit economics. I don't know. Bank of America, 200,000 employees. A few million clients. Then you go to PayPal. It's got millions of clients and very few employees. And this is even another step further, where you've got billions of customers and hardly any employees. I mean, the unit economics. It's just not possible to compete with those guys. They have scale and unit economics that we cannot compete with. And we cannot compete with it with today's rails. And we cannot compete with it even for the rails that are going to be there in 6 months or 2 years. We have to get so much more innovative than we are right now. Otherwise, you've got no hope. Sorry, don't want to be the bearer of bad news. But I think for me, the elephant in the room is we spend so much time. Honestly, we spend so much time patting ourselves on the back, saying we're the first to do chip and pin, or we're the first to do tap, or we're the first to launch Interact, which is P2P.
We have one of the most successful email payment systems in the world.
On the planet. Yeah. But we're behind in everything that really matters.
But we have the most successful email payment system in the world.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so moving on from no hope, let's. It's really hard, I got to tell you. Anyway.
Well, I think that's the elephant in the room that no one really wants to be honest about.
Yeah, so let's
we've got to be honest about it.
Well, let's talk
Call
about.
a spade a spade.
Let's talk about a few of the elephants.
Okay, let's talk about some elephants.
So this, all of this is in the report, and we're happy to chat with people if they want to understand how we did this research. But we chose to focus our research on publicly available information. So we don't pay for information. We don't, this is all publicly available, sourced, well-researched information about what our top 10 banks and our top 10 credit unions are doing in Canada. And this is just the lens of payments. So we did something like this for the Finance Canada work that we did. It was much bigger still, So what this tells us is, we've split the types of relationships that they talk about into two groups. One is partnerships, and those partnerships could be where we can see that they're partnering, like Wave or Thinking Capital, or where we don't see that they're partnering, like Moven, right? Moven is TD MySpend. And those are partnerships. And a lot of those 112 partnerships are also where financial institutions are working with the tech, so the AI services, the reg tech, the other things that are necessary in payments, but they're, you're never going to see them because they are just improving things or making things more efficient or making things digital. The right-hand side is where the financial institutions are focusing on or are building a fintech-like service. So a wallet, a better, mobile payments experience. Yesterday, and so CIBC wouldn't be in here, and I think BMO launched. Everybody made some news announcement this week, it looks like. But when they're launching stuff that they're building themselves. And I think the reason why we wanted to shed light on this, and I think it might even, if you go to the next slide.
I can.
Is there is some interesting things happening, but this is over, Johnny, how many years? Okay, so roughly 10 years, and just payments. So this is not about trying to say that, it's terrible, but the number of startups that are in Canada or are, doing business in Canada but aren't Canadian, they're few and far between as to how many of them are working with financial institutions. And I think there's tons of stuff we can talk about as to why. The tech giants, the only reason why that's a slightly higher bar is because of Apple Pay. And I remember I was at D&H, which is now Finastra, at the time when Apple Pay, was trying to get into Canada, and all the banks scurried around and tried to figure out how to prevent that, because they were going to be giving up.
How to manage.
Manage, okay. How to manage that.
In the best interest of Canadians.
Are you kidding?
Is that your outside voice, Jeff?
Yeah.
Anyway, we haven't talked about non-financial companies. Like, if anyone checked out like Loblaws these days, 19 million people on PC Optimum, loyalty cards, it would be like that for them to offer them a way to store money and not have to use other financial instruments. So
they've really got a store of value, because that's exactly what the points are.
Yeah. So this, there's stuff happening, but it's taking too long. It's the recent announcements this week. I think most of those partnerships took 2 to 3 years to implement, and probably, a lot of people lost a lot of hair doing that. Like, it's so hard, right, to do. And I think our reason for being here and supporting the PayTechs of Canada group is it's not going to happen if we just let it go the way it's going, right? There has to be some intervention, and I do think it's government intervention to mandate some change for the benefit of, our successful economy. Because if we just keep going the way we're going, then we're all betting that, that we're going to win over a completely transformed digital world. And I just can't see that. I don't know.
If we looked at the same chart for the UK, it'd just be so different. It's unbelievable. And faster payments in the UK launched in 2008. These are all the deals we've done since 2008. They've done 6 trillion sterling in transactions over faster payments in that time. All right. So while we've done our 45 partnerships, they've done 6 trillion euros. 6 trillion sterling in transactions over faster payments. Kind of feels like we're sitting on our hands.
Wow. Okay, so just before lunch, just before the bars actually open and you can go there, from hearing that this, the end of the world, and we're way behind.
You can drink your way through any crisis.
I actually don't remember the entire list of things. Look, I am a bit of an optimist. I think some people might say that. Would you say that? You've worked with me for a while.
Okay, I would say a sarcastic optimist. That's what I would say.
Look, the game's not over. The game has just begun. And I will say that, look, I've spent more of my career working and living in Canada. I'm a Canadian. I'm a fourth-generation Canadian, actually. I've spent most of my career working here, but certainly the last decade has been more working elsewhere. I think Canada was in the lead. I think Canada used to be the place where you came and tested technology. I think Canada used to be the place where if we came out with it, we would adopt it and we would use it. And I think in the last few years, we've fallen behind. So if we accept that that's the reality, what are the opportunities?
So I think
because it's not all doom and gloom. We've got a thriving
so I think there
entrepreneurial
are
environment.
three immediate things that we would like to focus on. The first thing is to have access for non-banks to the payment system, and I think that's absolutely critical. That is a platform for innovation on which we can innovate.
And you mean direct access?
We mean direct access, yeah, direct access. So hey, sponsored access, if we can have that like tomorrow, is a good start. But direct access is a long-term game. Fast payments in the UK has 3 different ways. You can have direct and do clearing and settlement, or you can be direct and have a financial institution do the clearing and settlement, or you can be sponsored. So there's no reason why we couldn't come up with a hybrid as well. And maybe it's easier to do some of those things in the short term and others in the long term. But yes, ultimately the end game is direct access with a central bank account. So that's the first thing. The second thing is open banking. And open banking is all about data. Today, our Prime Minister announced this digital initiative that he's going to do, where he's going to try and control what's happening with Google and Facebook and all these guys. And he says that consumers should own their data. And I would just like him to add banking to that, because consumers should own their banking data as well. So I think open banking is fundamental to what we're doing. And then the last thing is payment initiation. And payment initiation really is the game changer. If you really want to create a frictionless experience, you need to have payment initiation. And I like to use the telecom analogy, and that is, imagine that you could not initiate a phone call on someone else's network. Right? That means your mobile phone would only work like 50% of the time in Canada, because, by the way, Bell and TELUS share a network. So half of the time you would be able to make a phone call in Canada, and abroad you'd never be able to make a call. That's what payment initiation is. That's the equivalent of that. We can initiate a call.
And by the way, only 50% of the time would the receiver of that call also be able to.
Correct. So pretty much the network wouldn't work. The whole thing wouldn't work. And so payment initiation is core to all of this, so that you can go inside your Uber app and initiate a credit push directly from your bank account. And then all of the innovation can happen on top of those 3 things. I think to do that, we need to understand what the real issues are. So this report is a really good start at understanding the core issues that are going on right now. I think we need to give Payments Canada a mandate where they can set a deadline and say, you will have ISO by this date, you will connect into our new system by this date for SOE and for real-time rail. Otherwise, you don't play. And they've done that in the United States. They've done that in Europe. They've done that everywhere in the world. But for some reason here, Payments Canada doesn't have a mandate to say, you must. If you want to play, you play by our rules. We set the rules. You play by our rules. That's what Payments Canada should be able to say. So I think the second thing that we need to do to further all 3 of those things is give Payments Canada a mandate to do their job. At the moment, they have to cajole and beg the people that pay for them to do the right thing for the country. And we're just not getting the right answers, and we're not getting them fast enough.
And
Sorry.
Sue?
I'm not very passionate
that was
about
very
it
good,
at all.
by the way.
I mean, we could. There you go. Round of applause.
The rest for you.
Okay. I mean, I think there's some other things that.
So thank you for coming.
Oh,
Sorry.
wow.
We have another minute.
No, I mean, the only other thing I would say is that there are, I really want us to figure out a way, and some of that will do this, but to let new business models enter the market. And I don't think that that's going to happen pretty much across the board, actually, not just in payments, but in lending, in wealth, in other areas where there are really good products that are enabled by all of this great technology, but they mean existing companies are going to make less money. And I think that that's something that, is inevitably going to happen. And I think that's something that needs to be part of, and will drive a lot of really positive change.
So you're absolutely right. We're so focused on PayTech right in this conversation, and I've ignored the incumbent, legacy businesses, as well as all the innovation that's happening in the market that actually relies on a payment capability as well. And that would include everything from the largest insurance companies to utilities to telcos that need better payment systems. So, we're focused on PayTech right now and the needs for PayTech, but there's actually a much bigger need at a national level to be able to deliver all of this. So, my bad. I should have spent more time on that.
So everybody, we're coming to the end of the session. I will say one comment to what you said, and that is that
Sorry, you're out of time, Jeff.
I am out of time. There it is, 0-0. The idea that the existing players will make less money, I will tell you that I'm not totally convinced that they'll make less money, because I think if ultimately you drive more value to the end users, you do it efficiently and effectively, there's opportunity for income to be made.
Competition makes you innovative.
They'll
get better.
They might be very, very dedicated to making high-performance buggy whips, but Goodyear did fairly well from my perspective. So, hey, thank you very much for coming. If you haven't gotten it already, please download the report. It's fantastic. I will put in another plug for FGS as doing really fantastic, unbiased research. And I think PayTechs for Canada are a really important organization. It's going to make a difference. Feel free to ask us all questions at the end, and have a great day.
Thank you.